What happens when the most trusted machinery suddenly turns against you? How can a routine check lead to a catastrophe that claims 9 lives in less than 12 seconds? On a seemingly normal day in an industrial factory, the unthinkable happened. The furnace, which everyone believed to be off, erupted with deadly force, taking the lives of 9 men in an instant. But what caused this disaster, and why did it unfold so quickly? Imagine a factory buzzing with activity, workers moving about, doing their tasks, confident that their equipment is safe, secure, and under control. After all, it's supposed to be routine: turn off the furnace, conduct maintenance, and carry on with other operations. But that day, something went horribly wrong. The furnace, which was supposed to be shut down for routine maintenance, suddenly came to life. The result? A fireball that engulfed the room, burning 9 men alive in a span of just 12 seconds. A moment of chaos that no one could have predicted, but everyone should have seen coming. You might think, how could this happen in a world where safety protocols are so heavily emphasized, where strict rules are supposed to keep workers safe? The answer is chilling. A combination of factors led to this disaster, but at the heart of it was a fatal lapse in safety, human error, and a complete failure to follow basic industrial procedures. But how did it all unfold so fast? What exactly went wrong, and how could it have been avoided? Stay with us as we dive deep into the catastrophic failure that led to this industrial nightmare. But before we do, we need to talk about something critical. We'll explore how such tragedies happen in the first place and how they can be prevented. But we'll also raise a deeper question. What's really going on behind the scenes when it comes to safety in these factories? Let's begin with the shocking reality of the furnace disaster. If you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to leave a comment, sharing your thoughts on what you think might have caused this disaster. Also, if you want to keep learning about these tragic events, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Now, let's dive deeper into the next part of this story. Before the furnace disaster, this factory was considered a model of industrial efficiency, a place where safety was taken seriously, protocols were followed, and regular maintenance was ensured, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface, there were small lapses that would ultimately lead to the unimaginable. This factory, like countless others in the industrial world, had strict safety protocols. Equipment was regularly inspected, safety training was conducted, and emergency drills were standard procedure. So, how did a disaster this catastrophic occur in a place that was supposedly following all the right rules? It all starts with the routine. When workers go through the same motions day after day, it's easy for them to become complacent. Safety checks, while mandatory, can sometimes feel like just another task to check off the list. The furnace was supposed to be off for maintenance, but the factory relied on a series of safety protocols to confirm it was truly safe. The failure of one of those safety measures set the stage for a tragic outcome. A key element that played a role in the disaster was the assumption that everything was as it should be. The furnace, being one of the oldest and most critical pieces of equipment in the factory, had been regularly maintained, but that maintenance was routine, done by the book. The factory relied on these routine checks to keep the workers safe, yet this day would reveal just how fragile that system was. Imagine the workers who walked into the factory that morning. To them, it was just another shift. The furnace was off, and they had a task to complete. They didn't question the process. Why would they? The factory had always been reliable. But something as simple as not double-checking a shutoff valve or failing to inspect a small mechanical failure became the catalyst for a disaster. How could something so simple lead to such destruction? And why didn't anyone see the warning signs before it was too late? This is where things start to take a dark turn, leading us into the heart of the tragic event. Stay with us as we begin to peel back the layers of what truly happened. It's often said that the smallest errors can lead to the largest disasters. This couldn't be truer than in the case of the furnace explosion. While the factory had strict protocols in place, it was one seemingly minor technical failure that set off a chain reaction, resulting in the deaths of 9 men in less than 12 seconds. At the heart of this tragedy was the furnace's control system. The furnace, which was supposed to be shut off for maintenance, had actually remained active, unbeknownst to the workers. This mistake wasn't the result of a major malfunction, but rather a tiny oversight in the safety protocols. A small, overlooked part of the system was responsible for a catastrophic outcome. The workers believed the furnace was off. The maintenance crew had followed all the right procedures and checked the systems as required. However, a single valve, designed to cut off the gas supply to the furnace, failed to fully close. This caused a small, undetectable gas leak, which, combined with the furnace's residual heat, led to a rapid buildup of pressure, and ultimately an explosion. What's staggering is that this tiny error, one that seemed almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, was the critical factor that led to the furnace's ignition. The workers had no way of knowing that something as simple as a faulty valve could trigger such an explosive chain reaction. The fact that this happened despite the presence of other safety mechanisms is a testament to how even well-designed systems can fail under certain circumstances. The furnace should have been safe, the procedures were in place, but something was overlooked, something small that no one could have predicted would have such devastating consequences. This technical failure was not just a simple mistake, it was a reminder of how fragile industrial safety can be, and how easily something as minor as a single overlooked step can lead to disaster. How could a factory that seemed to have everything under control be so vulnerable to a simple technical oversight? This question is the key to understanding what went wrong, and it brings us closer to the next part of the story, the human element. When it comes to industrial accidents, human error often plays a far greater role than we care to admit. While the technical failure in the furnace was a critical factor in the disaster, the tragedy was also fueled by human negligence, more lapses in judgment, poor decision-making, and the complacency that comes with routine. In the case of this catastrophic explosion, several human oversights were directly responsible for setting the stage for what would unfold. Workers, who were well-versed in safety protocols, failed to conduct a double check of the furnace's shutdown procedures. The routine had become so ingrained that the workers trusted the system too much. The assumption that the furnace was off, combined with a lack of thoroughness, proved to be deadly. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of human negligence was the decision to skip a final inspection. The maintenance team was under pressure to finish the job quickly and move on to the next task. This sense of urgency, while common in industrial environments, led to a fatal shortcut. The workers relied too heavily on automated systems to do the job for them, and didn't take the extra steps to verify that everything was, in fact, safe. Moreover, the company's culture played a role in the negligence. There was a tendency to downplay small issues and push through to meet deadlines. The furnace had been checked before the workers began their shift, and no one thought to revisit the procedures with a critical eye. It was this lack of diligence, compounded by the pressure to keep the factory running, that ultimately led to the fatal mistake. In an environment where routine is everything, human negligence becomes more dangerous because it is often masked by a false sense of security. The workers believed the system was infallible, and their complacency in performing safety checks left them vulnerable. They didn't question the obvious, and in doing so, overlooked the small, seemingly insignificant mistake that turned into a disaster. The true lesson here is clear. No amount of safety protocol or advanced equipment can replace the need for constant vigilance, especially in higher-risk environments. The human element, when overlooked or dismissed, can be the deciding factor in whether a tragedy is prevented or exacerbated. The furnace, which everyone assumed was off, suddenly roared to life, and within seconds, everything changed. The factory, once a bustling hub of industry, was now a scene of utter chaos. 9 men, who moments ago were carrying out their daily tasks, found themselves trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape from. The explosion, fueled by the technical failure and human error, unfolded in a split second, but its aftermath would last a lifetime. When the furnace ignited, it wasn't just a simple fire. The blast was powerful enough to send a shockwave through the factory, shaking the entire building. The heat and force of the explosion were so intense that those caught in its immediate vicinity were burned alive within 12 seconds. The workers had no chance to react, no time to flee. In a matter of seconds, the air was thick with smoke, and the once controlled environment had transformed into a hellish inferno. It wasn't just the explosion that killed those men, it was the speed at which everything happened. The blast was so fast and so fierce that even those who might have had a chance to escape were left with no way out. The factory's safety systems, which were supposed to detect such an anomaly, were either malfunctioning or too slow to react. The alarms that should have warned workers of the danger went unheard, and the workers, assuming the furnace was safely off, were too late to respond. The real horror was how the factory, which had been considered a relatively safe place to work, failed so catastrophically. The explosion didn't just destroy the furnace, it ravaged everything in its path, tearing through walls, collapsing ceilings, and leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. What followed was chaos, confusion, and panic. In those first moments, no one knew who was alive, who was trapped, or who had already perished. In the aftermath, the workers who survived were left with scars, both physical and psychological. The survivors, many of whom were in a state of shock, had to witness the immediate consequences of the explosion, their colleagues, their friends, lying lifeless or horribly burned. The factory's destruction was not just an industrial accident, it was a personal tragedy for everyone involved. The question now becomes, how could something so sudden, so violent, have been allowed to happen? Why did the factory's safety systems fail to prevent it? And perhaps more importantly, what could have been done to save the 9 men who lost their lives? These are the questions that we'll explore as we dive deeper into the causes of this disaster. When you think about industrial disasters, one of the first things that comes to mind is the failure of safety equipment. Factories, particularly those dealing with high-risk materials like heat and pressure, rely on a wide range of safety systems designed to prevent catastrophic events. But what happens when these systems fail, or worse, when they never had the chance to work in the first place? In the case of this furnace explosion, there were multiple layers of safety equipment in place. The furnace itself was equipped with automatic shut-off valves, temperature regulators, and gas detectors, all designed to ensure that the system would not overheat or ignite without warning. In theory, these safety measures should have prevented any disaster. But, as we know, theory often falls short in practice. The first failure was in the furnace's automatic shut-off valve. This valve, which should have been triggered to stop the gas flow, was malfunctioning. It either wasn't closed properly or was never activated at all. In any case, it failed to do its job, allowing the gas to leak into the furnace where it would eventually ignite. But this wasn't the only failure. The gas detectors, designed to alert the workers to any dangerous buildup of gas, also malfunctioned or failed to detect the leak in time. So, where did it go wrong? Why didn't these systems catch the issue before it escalated into a deadly explosion? The answer lies in both design flaws and human oversight. The furnace's safety systems were designed to work independently of each other, yet they didn't provide the level of redundancy necessary to account for failure. If one system failed, the others were supposed to kick in, but that didn't happen. Moreover, the failure to properly maintain and inspect the safety systems was a crucial oversight. While the factory followed standard procedures for maintenance, these systems were only checked on a surface level. No one thought to test the gas detectors thoroughly or to inspect the shut-off valve beyond its routine use. This failure in preventative maintenance, coupled with the over-reliance on the safety systems, created a perfect storm for disaster. Had the safety systems been checked more thoroughly, or had the workers been more attuned to their importance, the disaster might have been avoided. Instead, the workers were lulled into a false sense of security, believing that the factory's systems were foolproof. Unfortunately, this belief would cost the lives of 9 men. The question that remains is, can we truly rely on safety equipment to prevent disasters? Or does the true responsibility lie with the people who design, maintain, and monitor these systems? This is where the real lessons of this industrial catastrophe lie. In the aftermath of the explosion, the factory was a scene of devastation. The heat from the blast had created a furnace of its own, and the workers who were caught in the immediate vicinity had little to no chance of survival. The survivors, however, were left with more than just physical injuries. They carried with them the trauma of witnessing their colleagues perish in such a horrific manner. As the dust settled and the factory's alarms finally went off, the full scale of the disaster began to unfold. Those who had been fortunate enough to escape the initial blast were left scrambling for safety, navigating a smoke-filled maze of collapsed walls, broken beams, and flames that were quickly spreading. Many of the survivors were in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Their first instinct was survival, but the flames and debris made it almost impossible to move quickly enough to escape the carnage. The response from emergency services came in waves. First responders, firefighters, paramedics, and local rescue teams rushed to the factory in an attempt to save any remaining lives. The challenge, however, was monumental. The fire was still raging, and the structure of the factory was unstable. The explosion had caused significant damage to the building's support beams, and any attempt to enter the facility was perilous. Emergency teams had to work cautiously, knowing that the risk of further collapse was high. Rescue workers faced a heartbreaking situation. They could hear the cries of the trapped survivors, but they were unable to reach them in time. Every second felt like an eternity as rescuers tried to navigate the treacherous wreckage. In many cases, it was too late. The intensity of the flames, combined with the toxic smoke, made it nearly impossible for the workers to breathe or see. Those who had survived the initial blast now had to contend with the overwhelming heat and lack of oxygen as they tried to escape or find shelter. Among the survivors, the psychological toll was just as devastating as the physical injuries. Many had witnessed their colleagues' last moments, struggling to escape or calling out for help as they were consumed by the fire. For those who made it out alive, the trauma of seeing their co-workers perish in such a brutal and sudden way would haunt them for years to come. In the days that followed, the factory would be declared a crime scene, as investigators began to piece together what went wrong. Families of the victims, many of whom had worked alongside the men who died, were left to mourn their losses and demand answers. The factory, once seen as a safe place of employment, had become a symbol of industrial negligence. The rescue efforts, while heroic, could do little to reverse the damage. The factory, the lives lost, and the scars left behind, served as a stark reminder of how fragile industrial safety really is. And as the survivors processed the trauma, the world was left to ask, what could have been done to prevent this tragedy, and how could the survivors move forward from such a devastating loss? When the dust settled and the factory was finally deemed safe to inspect, the true consequences of the explosion began to emerge. The factory, once a cornerstone of industry, was now reduced to rubble. The blast had not only destroyed critical equipment, but had also claimed the lives of 9 workers in the most horrific way possible. But the shock didn't end there. What followed was a lack of meaningful change, a failure to fully address the root causes, and a company culture that seemed to push the tragedy aside. The immediate response from the factory's management was to contain the public relations disaster. Statements were issued, safety inspections were promised, and there were assurances that new safety measures would be implemented. However, as the months passed, the attention waned. The factory resumed its operations, with only minor adjustments made to safety procedures, but the underlying problems that led to the explosion remained largely unaddressed. The company's leadership, perhaps embarrassed by the failure, shifted the focus to getting the factory back up and running, while the employees who survived the disaster were offered counseling, and some families of the victims received compensation. The factory itself continued to operate with the same flawed systems. The furnace, the equipment, and the procedures that failed were left in place, with only temporary fixes applied to prevent further explosions. What's even more disturbing is that the culture of complacency that contributed to the tragedy persisted. Safety became a checkbox, something that needed to be completed rather than something to be actively safeguarded. Workers were trained to follow procedures, but those procedures were outdated and insufficient. The factory's leadership had promised reforms, but those promises remained largely unfulfilled. The lack of real change was not just a failure of leadership, it was a failure of an entire system that placed profit over people. The factory's owners were more concerned with getting back to business than ensuring that such a disaster never happened again. The safety measures that could have prevented the catastrophe were ignored, and the lessons of the tragedy were quickly forgotten. The factory continued to operate, and the lives lost in the explosion became just another statistic in the long history of industrial accidents. The survivors, still haunted by the traumatic events they witnessed, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Their pain was compounded by the knowledge that the company had done little to ensure that future generations of workers would be better protected. This negligence wasn't just a failure of equipment, it was a failure of leadership and responsibility. It showed that even after such a devastating event, real change was slow to come, and the systems that failed remained in place, allowing for the possibility of future disasters. The aftermath of the furnace explosion left a dark mark, not only on the factory, but on the entire industrial sector, where the lessons of safety and human life seemed to be brushed aside in favor of economic recovery. In the wake of such a tragic industrial disaster, questions arise not only about the specific circumstances of the event, but about the broader state of safety in factories and industrial settings worldwide. What could have been done differently to prevent this catastrophe? Was it a series of unfortunate events, or was it an inevitable outcome of a flawed system? And, most importantly, what can industries and workers learn from this tragedy to ensure it never happens again? At the heart of this disaster was a fundamental issue of trust in safety systems, trust in protocols, and trust in the equipment that was supposed to protect workers. The factory had established safety measures, and workers were trained to follow these protocols. However, the tragic irony is that it was the very belief in these systems, the assumption that everything was in order, that led to complacency. Safety measures were not treated with the urgency and attention they deserved, and that oversight was fatal. There is a lesson here about the nature of safety. It's not enough to simply have protocols and equipment in place. There must be a continuous, active effort to review, test, and improve these systems. Relying on routine checks without questioning their efficacy is where industries often falter. In this case, the failure of a single shutoff valve, a seemingly minor issue, was the spark that ignited the disaster. But this small failure could have been prevented if proper attention and testing had been given to the safety systems, ensuring they would function under all circumstances. What's more troubling is the tendency for companies to focus on getting back to business as usual as quickly as possible. After the explosion, the factory focused on resuming operations, making only superficial adjustments to the systems that had failed. This reactive approach is common in many industries, where immediate concerns over profitability and productivity often overshadow the long-term need for safety improvement. The real changes that could have prevented future disasters were largely ignored, leaving the same flawed systems in place. The key takeaway here is that the culture of safety within an organization must be proactive rather than reactive. It's not enough to simply follow the rules. Those rules must be scrutinized, updated, and continually tested against real-world risks. Safety should be ingrained in the fabric of the company, and the well-being of workers should be seen as a primary goal, not an afterthought. As we reflect on this disaster, it's clear that a shift in mindset is necessary. Safety is not just about following established procedures, it's about creating an environment where every employee feels responsible for maintaining safety and where management takes full accountability for the well-being of their workers. Had these values been prioritized, the furnace explosion might never have happened. The explosion that claimed 9 lives in a flash would forever mark the factory, its workers, and the families of the victims. The tragedy didn't just destroy machinery and equipment. It destroyed trust in the factory's safety system, shattered lives, and left a legacy of unanswered questions. As the factory rebuilt and resumed its operations, the emotional scars on the survivors and the families of the deceased were far more difficult to heal than the physical damage to the building. In the wake of the explosion, the families of the victims were left to grapple with the loss of their loved ones. The legal system, slow and cumbersome as always, took its time to investigate the cause of the disaster. Workers' compensation claims, lawsuits, and corporate inquiries were launched. But the factory's ownership did what they could to avoid full responsibility. Their main priority was to minimize the damage to their reputation and move forward with as little disruption to their operations as possible. While the factory promised to implement new safety measures, the question remained, would they truly change, or would it be business as usual? The legal actions that followed the disaster brought some accountability, but had never fully addressed the underlying culture of negligence that had enabled the accident to happen in the first place. The factory, despite the promises of change, continued its operations with only minor alterations to its safety protocols. It was clear that while some systems were updated, the broader shift in safety culture that was desperately needed never truly came to pass. For the survivors, the journey of recovery was both physical and psychological. Some returned to work at the factory, but their experiences lingered with them, sometimes in the form of PTSD, survivor's guilt, or the haunting memories of what they had witnessed. Others couldn't continue in the same environment, seeking work elsewhere, as they struggled to come to terms with the loss of their colleagues. In the years that followed, the tragedy became a grim reminder of the risks that come with industrial labor, and a cautionary tale about the importance of not allowing safety systems to fall into complacency. Workers and their families pushed for better protections and a stronger voice in how factories were run. The tragedy served as a catalyst for broader conversations about industrial safety standards, but too often, those conversations were short-lived, overtaken by the pressures of running a business. While the factory continued its operations, it never fully escaped the shadow of the explosion. It became a place marked by memories of those lost, of lives destroyed in an instant. The families of the victims, the survivors, and the workers who continued on would always remember that moment. And for them, the factory was never quite the same. The real legacy of the disaster wasn't just the tragedy itself, it was the question that still lingers. Could it have been prevented? Could the lives of the 9 men have been spared if the company had truly prioritized safety over profit? If they had acted on the lessons learned from the disaster instead of sweeping them under the rug? These questions remain unanswered, but the tragedy serves as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance, responsibility, and a genuine commitment to worker safety in the industrial world. If you made it this far, thank you for watching and diving into this tragic but important story. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more compelling tales like this, and leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on how we can prevent similar disasters in the future. What steps do you think should be taken to improve industrial safety? Let us know. And if you found this video impactful, please leave a like to help others discover this story. Don't forget to check out the next video on the screen now for more eye-opening content.